Henry Fernandez was on the verge of signing the most crucial contract of his career. This signature would seal the merger of his company with the powerful Lombard International Corporation, an agreement that promised to elevate his company to unprecedented heights. Millions were at stake, and he held the pen mere inches from the paper when the boardroom door suddenly swung open. In walked Victoria Morales, one of the cleaning staff, discreetly pushing her cart. "Excuse me, I'll just empty the trash real quick," she murmured respectfully. No one seemed to notice. Everyone was too excited, almost celebrating prematurely. Victoria approached the trash can beside Henry's chair, feigned adjusting the bag, but actually leaned towards him and, in the lowest possible voice, whispered, "Don't sign. It's a trap." Henry froze. The pen slipped from his fingers and fell softly onto the wooden table. "What?" he whispered, incredulous, barely moving his lips. Victoria slowly straightened up, looked at him seriously for just an instant, then averted her gaze as if nothing had happened. She took the trash can, placed it on her cart, and began walking towards the door. But Henry couldn't stop watching her, his heart pounding in his chest. His lifelong partner, Paul Caldwell, looked at him with a strange smile. "Everything all right, Henry?" he asked in an excessively casual tone. "Ready to sign?" added Alexander, one of Lombard's representatives, who was seated across the table. Henry swallowed hard. The contract lay there, untouched. The open folder revealed the details of the merger they had reviewed for weeks. He looked at Paul, then at Alexander, and finally, at the door through which Victoria was about to exit. Everything seemed to spin around him. "I need 5 minutes," he said suddenly, standing up. 5 minutes? Paul tried to sound relaxed, but his eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Is everything okay? I have something to take care of," Henry replied, walking towards the exit. "Henry, we're all here. There's nothing left to review." Alexander's voice sounded increasingly annoyed. 5 minutes, Henry repeated firmly. He didn't wait for further objections and left the room, closing the door behind him. He walked quickly down the hall until he caught up with Victoria, who had only moved a few feet with her cart. "You," Henry said, pointing at her firmly. "Come with me right now." Victoria hesitated for an instant, surprised, but eventually agreed. They walked in silence to a small break room. Henry entered first, she followed, and he closed the door decisively. "Explain yourself right now," he said, arms crossed, his gaze fixed on her. "And convince me that you're not crazy for interrupting me like that." Victoria still held a trash bag in one hand. "I know I seem strange, but I overheard conversations no one else did. They want to trick you, Mr. Fernandez." "Who?" Henry asked, growing more serious. "Lombard and your partner, Paul," she replied, her voice trembling but soon steadying. "They're using the contract to transfer hidden debts and sink your company. If you sign, you'll lose everything." Henry watched her intently for a few seconds that felt eternal. Part of him wanted to laugh, but another part felt a chill run down his spine. "What's your name?" he asked in a grave voice. "Victoria. How long have you worked here?" 8 months, night shift." "All right, Victoria. I'm going to be clear. If this is a lie, a conspiracy theory, or a trick to get attention, you'll be fired this very moment." Victoria bit her lip but didn't look away. "I understand and accept the consequences, but if I stayed silent and you lost everything, I'd never forgive myself." Henry turned his face and looked at his reflection in the glass wall. From up in the building, he saw New York City in motion, but for him, everything seemed still. That woman had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and yet she was there, taking a risk. "Do you have proof?" he asked without looking at her. "Yes, photos, recordings, documents. I can show you. Tonight at 7 p.m., right here," he said, pointing to the spot. "Bring everything. If you can't convince me, it will be your last day at the company." Victoria nodded. Henry waited for her to leave before leaning his forehead against the cold wall. The contract was still on the boardroom table, awaiting his signature, but for the first time in his career, he was in doubt. When he returned to the boardroom, the silence was absolute. Everyone looked at him as soon as he pushed the door open. Paul was speaking quietly with Alexander but immediately straightened up. "Did you resolve what was pending?" Paul asked, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yes," Henry replied, as he approached the table without yet sitting down. He looked at the contract, then at those present. "Actually, I think I need to review some clauses again." "Review?" Alexander frowned. "Mr. Fernandez, we've spent weeks going over every detail of this document. Precisely why I want to take one last look," Henry retorted, closing the folder with force. Let's reschedule for tomorrow. The tension was palpable. Paul slowly stood up, resting his fists on the table. Henry, this makes no sense. We're losing valuable time. Lombard has other interested parties, you know. Then let them attend to them, Henry replied coldly. One night won't change anything. It will, Alexander interjected, pounding his hand on the table. The market is unstable. Stocks are high. It's now or never. Henry watched him calmly. This pressure was too suspicious. The decision is mine, he said in a firm voice. He placed the contract in his executive briefcase. See you tomorrow. And he left the room, leaving behind an atmosphere charged with anger and frustration. At exactly 7 o'clock, Henry returned to the small break room. Victoria was already waiting for him, sitting in one of the chairs with a small backpack on her lap. She stood up when she saw him enter. Thank you for coming, she said, this time with more confidence. Show me what you have, Henry asked, sitting opposite her. Victoria opened her backpack and took out her cell phone. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through photos and documents on the screen. It all started 3 weeks ago, she explained. I was cleaning Paul's office when I heard voices in the next room. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. She recognized his voice and that of a woman. What woman? Henry asked, leaning forward. Patricia Thompson, she replied seriously. Tall, blonde, always dressed in expensive clothes. Victoria showed a photo taken secretly through a crack in the door. Henry felt a shiver run through his body. Patricia Thompson, his ex-girlfriend. Henry could hardly believe it. Patricia Thompson, the woman who had been his companion for 2 years and who had left him saying they were too different, was now involved in a plan to destroy him. How is she involved in this? He asked in a low voice, almost with a knot in his throat. She and Paul are together now, Victoria replied, moving to the next image. And they're planning something against you. Victoria scrolled the screen and played an audio recording from her phone. Although the quality wasn't perfect, the voices were clear. Once he signs, we'll have total control of the assets. Are you sure Henry doesn't suspect anything? He's always been too naive to notice when he's betrayed. It was like that with me, and it will be now. And if he finds out, he won't do anything. He trusts too much. In 48 hours, the company will be ours. Henry's blood ran cold. Paul's voice was unmistakable. And Patricia's laugh, which once seemed charming, now sounded venomous. Do you have more proof? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Yes, Victoria replied, rushing through more photos of documents and screenshots. Look, here are bank transfers to unknown accounts. And these clauses, she pointed to a section of a photographed contract. In the version you reviewed, it says you'll retain 60% control, but in the real one they'll try to use, you'll only get 20%. Henry took her phone to see with his own eyes. This is fraud, a crime. And that's not all, Victoria added, moving to another photo. Look at this transfer. $1.5 million that Lombard sent last week to Paul Caldwell's personal account. Henry suddenly stood up and walked to the window. From the 30th floor, New York City sparkled at night, but for him, everything was dark. Why? He whispered, more to himself. Paul, my best friend for 15 years. We studied together, built the company from scratch. Sometimes people change when there's too much money involved, Victoria replied softly. Or maybe they were always like that, and we just didn't want to see it. Henry looked at her, still trying to process everything. And why are you telling me this? You could lose your job. Victoria hesitated a moment before answering. Because it's the right thing to do. I can't stay silent watching them destroy you. Henry studied her. He knew there was something more behind her words, but Victoria didn't seem ready to tell. I need more proof, he finally said. I have to be absolutely sure. I can get it, but it will be risky. Then be careful, Henry warned in a firm voice, but with a worried look. If this is true, if Paul really is betraying me. He couldn't finish the sentence. We'll find out, Victoria assured him, with determination. When she left, Henry remained alone, looking at the city through the window. For the first time in 15 years, he doubted his partner and friend, and that doubt hurt him deeply. The next day, he arrived at the office earlier than ever. He had spent the night awake, thinking about the evidence Victoria had shown him. The images of the falsified contracts and illegal transfers repeated in his mind like an unbearable echo. He went directly to the Human Resources Department. I need Victoria Morales' file, he asked Patricia Green, the head of the department. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. The cleaning lady? Is something wrong? Just a routine check. Henry lied, trying to sound casual. Patricia handed him a thin folder. Henry opened it, and as he read, his eyes widened in disbelief. Victoria Morales, 28 years old, bachelor's in business administration from NYU Stern, with a specialization in corporate finance. Previous experience in consulting at McKinsey & Company Brazil. McKinsey? Henry whispered in amazement. Excuse me? Patricia asked, leaning in to see what he was reading. Nothing, thank you, he replied, abruptly closing the folder and returning it. He left human resources, his mind reeling. How could someone with that resume be working as a cleaning lady? During lunch, he looked for Victoria in the hallways. He found her on the 12th floor, cleaning the windows of a small meeting room. Victoria, he called, approaching. She turned, surprised to see him there. Is something wrong? Did you find out more about Paul? Actually, I found out something about you, Henry said, crossing his arms. NYU Stern, McKinsey & Company, corporate finance. Victoria's face pallid. The cloth in her hand fell to the floor. You saw my file. Why didn't you tell me who you really are? Victoria looked around to make sure they were alone before responding bitterly. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many degrees I have or what company I worked for. To everyone here, I'm just the cleaning lady. But McKinsey is impressive. How did you end up here? I worked there for 2 years, she interrupted. I was good, very good. But when it came time for promotions, there was always a reason why I didn't advance. Henry listened intently, noticing the hurt in her words. One day, they said I lacked experience. Another, that my communication style didn't fit the company culture. In other words, I was too competent for my role, but I didn't fit their mold for a leadership position. That's discrimination, Henry murmured. You could have sued. With what money? She retorted, picking up her bucket. And who do you think they would have believed? A woman from a low-income neighborhood, or a company the size of McKinsey? Henry fell silent, digesting the injustice. And your family? I remember you mentioned a sister. Joyce is 22, Victoria replied in a low voice. She was born with a congenital heart problem. She needs surgery that costs $600,000. She paused for a moment, swallowing hard. When they forced me out, I had to take any job I could find. This one, at least, offers a health plan that covers part of the medications and the future operation. Henry felt a knot in his chest. He had before him a brilliant woman, educated at one of the best universities, with experience in an international consultancy, working as a cleaning lady just to save her sister. I had no idea. Well, now you know, she replied, resuming window cleaning. That's why you recognize the irregularities in the contract so quickly, Henry concluded. You spent years analyzing documents like that. Exactly, she nodded. And that's why I warned you. Only for that? Victoria stared at him directly before responding. Also because you're different from the other executives. I've observed you for months. You treat everyone with respect, regardless of their position. When I saw they planned to destroy you the same way they destroyed my career, I couldn't stay silent. Henry held her gaze for several seconds. Victoria Morales was not just a cleaning lady who had accidentally overheard something. She was a high-level professional who had detected corporate fraud and risked herself to warn him. Victoria, when all this is over, Paul's voice echoed down the hallway, interrupting him. What are you doing here? He asked in a curious tone, glancing sideways at Victoria. Just checking how the cleaning is going, Henry replied quickly. You know I'm a stickler for details. Paul looked at her suspiciously. Since when do you personally worry about that? Since I decided to pay more attention, Henry retorted with a forced smile. Have you rescheduled the meeting with Lombard for this afternoon? Yes, at 3, Paul replied, still watching Victoria. Perfect, Henry said. Let's grab lunch. I want to go over some contract adjustments. As they walked towards the elevator, Henry noticed the last suspicious glance Paul cast at Victoria. Victoria was finishing cleaning the executive restroom on the 15th floor when she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was almost 5 p.m., and most employees had already left. She stayed quiet, intrigued, and listened. She immediately recognized Paul Coldwell's grave voice. I'm sure it was her, he was saying in a low tone. A woman's voice, sharp, chilled, Victoria's blood. It was Patricia Thompson, the same woman she had seen talking to Henry the day before. Exactly. After a little digging, I found out who Victoria Morales is. 28 years old, former McKinsey consultant, too smart for her own good. Victoria leaned against the wall, holding her breath. Do you think she overheard what we discussed last week? Patricia asked, worried. I'm certain. I checked the security cameras. She was cleaning my office right when we were finalizing the last details. And today Henry behaved differently. He cancelled the signing, asked uncomfortable questions. Something has changed. Damn, Patricia huffed. If Henry finds out about the transfers, we're finished. Calm down, Paul reassured her. He won't find out anything if we get rid of the source of the problem. Victoria covered her mouth with both hands to stifle a gasp. How do you plan to do that? Patricia asked in the most humiliating way possible. We'll accuse her of theft in front of everyone. No one will believe a fired cleaning lady. And if Henry tries to defend her, I'll make him look ridiculous. And if he insists? She retorted. He won't. Henry is predictable. He's been my friend for 15 years. I know how to handle him. Both laughed wickedly. Victoria closed her eyes, holding back tears. She had risked herself to save him, and now they planned to destroy her. When? Patricia asked. Right now. I'm calling all personnel to the auditorium under the guise of a security meeting. The footsteps receded. Victoria remained hidden for a few more minutes, her heart pounding. She thought of her sister, Joyce. If she was fired for theft, they would lose not only her salary but also the health plan that kept her sister alive. The building's loudspeaker suddenly turned on. All personnel are requested to proceed to the main auditorium for an urgent security meeting. Victoria took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and left the restroom. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her tremble. The auditorium was filled with murmuring employees, surprised by the sudden meeting. Henry was seated in the front row with the executives, visibly confused. When their eyes met with Victoria's, she could sense the doubt on his face. Paul climbed onto the stage with a folder in hand and a solemn expression. Thank you for coming on such short notice, he began. Unfortunately, I must speak about a serious matter that threatens the security of our company. A murmur ran through the room. Yesterday, we discovered that photographs of confidential documents were taken in the executive offices, he continued. This constitutes a grave act of corporate espionage. Victoria felt a chill. After an internal investigation, we have identified the person responsible, Paul said, looking directly at her. Victoria Morales from the cleaning staff. Please, come forward. Everyone turned. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with suspicion. Victoria took a deep breath and walked towards the stage, head held high. Miss Morales, Paul continued in a cold voice. On your cell phone, we found images of confidential documents. How do you explain this? Victoria looked at Henry. His face showed surprise and confusion. She could see he was struggling internally. She began to say. But Paul interrupted her. Furthermore, he added, holding up several printed photos. Cameras recorded you entering the offices outside your cleaning hours. He passed the photos to the front row. Henry took one, and his expression changed to something akin to disappointment. The theft of information is a federal crime, Paul continued, raising his voice. But given that your record until now was clean, we have decided to limit this to immediate termination for just cause, without involving the authorities. That's not fair, Victoria exclaimed, finally finding her voice. I was only trying to protect. Protect what? Your own interest? Patricia interrupted her, now standing among the audience. You plan to sell the information to a competitor. No, Victoria cried. I wanted to protect Mr. Fernandez from a betrayal. Enough, Paul thundered, pounding the podium. I will not allow a dishonest employee to tarnish the name of this company. Security, escort her out. 2 guards advanced towards her. Victoria! She looked at Henry desperately. Henry, you know I'm telling the truth. I showed you the proofs. For a moment, it seemed Henry would stand to defend her. He slowly rose, and Victoria's heart leaped, but then he lowered his gaze and murmured in a faded voice. I'm sorry, Victoria. The evidence against you is clear. It was as if her soul had been ripped out. Henry, please, she managed to say, but the guards were already holding her by the arms. Victoria pulled away with dignity. I can walk on my own, she said firmly, even as tears streamed down her face. As she was about to exit the auditorium, she turned to Henry and spoke in a loud voice so everyone could hear. When you discover the truth, remember this. You had the opportunity to do the right thing, and you chose not to. The silence was sepulchral. Henry closed his eyes, as if those words were blows. Victoria walked out, escorted under the gaze of dozens of colleagues. Some watched her with pity, others with relief that it wasn't them in her place. At the entrance, an older guard handed her a box with her few belongings. I'm sorry, Miss Morales, he said softly. Orders? She nodded, took the box, and walked out to the street. Each step weighed like lead. She had lost her job, her reputation, and, worse still, the health plan that kept her sister alive. Meanwhile, in the auditorium, Paul approached Henry and patted him on the shoulder. "I know it's hard, buddy. She seemed like a good employee, but sometimes people disappoint us." Henry looked at him, searching for any sign of falsehood, but Paul feigned sincere concern. "The evidence was clear," Henry murmured, more to convince himself than others. "Exactly," Paul nodded. "Now we can focus on what really matters, the merger." Henry nodded slowly, but inside, something didn't feel right. The desperation in Victoria's voice kept echoing in his head. When everyone else left, Henry remained alone in the room, tormented by the feeling that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. That night, Henry couldn't get a wink of sleep. The image of Victoria being escorted out of the building tormented him repeatedly. He remembered the desperation in her voice, the plea in her eyes, and the fact that he had remained silent. At 3 a.m., he suddenly got up. He couldn't continue doubting anymore. He dressed in a hurry and drove to his company's headquarters in downtown New York City. The building was dimly lit. Only security guards patrolled the hallways. Henry walked straight through with his access card and went up to the executive floor. He entered his office, turned on his computer, and began reviewing all documents related to the merger. Something wasn't right, and he needed to find it. The contract seemed in order, at least at first glance, but he remembered Victoria had mentioned hidden clauses and different versions. He spent hours reviewing line by line until, on page 47, he found a reference to an appendix he had never seen. Appendix C, Post-Merger Asset Distribution. He searched the digital folders, but it didn't appear. Intrigued, he accessed the company's most restricted files, to which only a handful of executives had access. After entering his CEO password, he discovered an encrypted folder titled Projections. There was Appendix C. Henry opened it and felt his blood run cold. The document stipulated that after the merger, 80% of the company's assets would transfer to a company called Lombard International Holdings. He had never heard of it. He investigated further and discovered that this company was registered in the Cayman Islands, and its main shareholders were Paul Caldwell and Patricia Thompson. "It can't be," Henry whispered, reading the document repeatedly to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. The plan was ingenious and ruthless. They would make him sign, believing he maintained majority control, when in fact, he would be ceding almost everything to a shell company controlled by his best friend and his ex-girlfriend. Trembling, he printed the document and continued investigating. He accessed the company's bank accounts with his director access. What he found confirmed the worst. In the last 2 months, transfers of over $2 million had been made under the concept of merger preparation. The money supposedly went to Lombard Corporation, but the destination accounts did not match the official ones. He followed the trail and discovered that the funds had ended up in a personal account in Paul Caldwell's name. 15 years of friendship, Henry whispered, feeling a tightness in his chest. It wasn't just corporate betrayal. It was a deep personal deception from someone he had trusted his entire adult life. He continued digging. He found emails between Paul and supposed Lombard executives, to which he had never been copied. The messages revealed that the merger was nothing more than a disguise for a hostile takeover. Lombard wasn't even an active corporation, just a front for the fraud. In one of the emails dated 3 weeks ago, Paul wrote, "With 15 years of friendship on my side, Henry will never suspect. When he signs, we'll have total control and can disappear before he realizes it." Henry had to pull away from the screen. He felt nauseous. Paul had been his best friend, a brother for life, and Patricia, the woman he had loved, despised him so much that she was willing to sink him along with Paul. That wasn't all. The server also stored phone calls automatically recorded by the company's security system. He played one from 2 weeks ago. "Are you sure Henry doesn't suspect?" Patricia asked. "I know him well," Paul replied. "He's too trusting. He'd never imagine I'd betray him. And if he finds out? If that happens, we'll use the falsified documents. We'll accuse him of fraud. With my word against his and our contacts in the press, everything will be in our favor. How you hate him." "It's not hate, it's ambition." Henry slumped into his chair, his soul in pieces. He remembered Paul at his wedding as his best man. He remembered the tears they shared when his mother died. He remembered all the sacrifices they made together to build the company from scratch. It had all been a facade. Dawn caught him still in front of the computer, surrounded by printed documents and recordings saved on a flash drive. He had enough evidence to send them straight to prison, but he also carried an enormous weight on his conscience. Victoria had tried to save him, and he had remained silent when she needed him most. He remembered her words in the auditorium. "You had the opportunity to do the right thing, and you chose not to." She was right. With a mixture of determination and remorse, Henry copied all the files to several emails and sent them to himself from different accounts. He put the flash drive in his pocket and shut down the computer. He knew time was running out. He had barely left the building when his phone rang. It was Paul. "Henry, glad you picked up." His voice sounded strangely calm. "I couldn't sleep after last night. I know the cleaning lady thing got to you." Henry took a deep breath, trying to sound normal. "I'm fine. It was tough, but you were right. The evidence was clear." "I'm glad you understand." Paul lowered his voice. "Ready for today? It's our big moment." "Yes, at 9. No, at 3. And remember, Henry, no matter what happens in business, our friendship is what matters most." Henry closed his eyes, containing his anger. Those hypocritical words nauseated him. "Of course, Paul," he replied in a tense voice. "For me too." He hung up and looked at the sunrise over New York City. He knew what he had to do: save his company, clear Victoria's name, and confront the two traitors. But first, he needed to find her. After everything she had risked, the least he could do was apologize. Using the human resources records, Henry located her address in a humble neighborhood in Queens. He drove there and stopped in front of a worn 3-story building with peeling paint and windows patched with tape. He climbed the stairs to the second floor and knocked on the door of apartment 2B. Slow footsteps were heard inside. The door opened just enough for the chain. Victoria peered out, her eyes red from crying all night. "What do you want?" she asked in a cold voice. "Victoria, please, I need to talk to you. I found out the truth about Paul and Patricia." She let out a bitter laugh. "Only now did you realize? How convenient after you made me look ridiculous in front of everyone." "Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." She cut him off, trying to close the door. Henry put his hand against the wood. "Wait, you were right. I found the proofs, the contract, the transfers, the shell company, everything." Victoria looked at him for an instant, hesitating. "And what do you want me to do with that? I've already lost everything. My job, my reputation, and worst of all, the health plan that keeps my sister alive." A faint voice sounded from inside. "Victoria, who is it?" She sighed. "It's my sister, Joyce." "She's sick." 5 minutes, Henry pleaded. "I just want to truly apologize." Victoria was silent for a few seconds. Finally, she unlatched the chain and opened the door. The apartment was small but tidy. On the walls were family photos, and on the sofa rested a young woman of about 22, very similar to Victoria, but pale and fragile. "This is Henry Fernandez," Victoria said. "Joyce, he was my boss." "Nice to meet you," she whispered with a weak smile. Henry felt a knot in his throat. This young woman was the reason Victoria endured humiliations working as a cleaning lady. Joyce slowly settled back on the sofa with effort. Still, she tried to smile kindly. "Victoria talks a lot about you," she said softly. "She says you're not like the other bosses, that you treat everyone with respect." Victoria shifted uncomfortably and averted her gaze as if she wanted her sister to stop talking. Henry, on the contrary, felt those words like blows to the chest. If she thought that of him, how could he have remained silent in the auditorium? "Joyce, you should rest," Victoria interjected softly. "I'm fine, just a little tired," her sister replied, before slowly getting up. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mr. Fernandez." "Please, call me Henry," he said, bowing his head respectfully. Joyce smiled and disappeared down the hall. The silence between the two grew heavy. Victoria looked at him with a mixture of anger and sadness. "See?" she said at last. "She depends on the company's health plan. By firing me, Paul not only destroyed my name, but also put her life at risk." "Victoria?" Henry asked cautiously. "What kind of surgery does she need?" She hesitated but replied, "A heart valve transplant. Doctors say without it, she might have 6 months to live. The operation costs $600,000. The plan covered 60%. I was trying to save up the rest with extra jobs, but now I have nothing." Henry felt an unbearable weight on his chest. "I can pay for that operation." Victoria immediately stood up, indignant. "No, I won't accept your charity." "It's not charity," Henry retorted firmly. "It's my responsibility. I failed, Victoria. I remained silent when I should have defended you." "Don't kid yourself," she replied, her voice broken. "It wasn't that you remained silent. You betrayed me. You knew who I was. You knew I was trying to help you, and yet you left me alone in front of everyone." Henry ran a hand through his hair, desperate. "You're right. I was a coward. I hesitated between my best friend of a lifetime and a woman I barely knew, and I chose wrong. But now I know the truth. Paul and Patricia deceived me for years. And if it weren't for you, I'd already be ruined." Victoria looked at him with tears in her eyes. But she didn't yield. "And what does that change? I'm still unemployed, without a health plan, and with my sister at risk." "I know," Henry said, his voice cracking. "That's why I won't rest until I resolve this. I will clear your name, Victoria. I will expose them and prove who was telling the truth." She shook her head. "It's too late. I don't trust you." "Then don't trust me," he replied, approaching. "Trust what you found, the documents, the recordings. Trust that justice exists." Victoria remained silent. Inside, she wanted to believe him, but the wound of humiliation still burned too much. Finally, she opened the door and pointed outside. "Go, Henry. My sister needs to rest, and I need to figure out how I'll survive without this job." He paused on the threshold. "This doesn't end here. I'm going to unmask them and prove you were always right." Without getting a response, he left the apartment. The door closed behind him with a sound that seemed definitive. Henry descended the stairs, his heart shattered. Outside, he stood for a moment, looking at the old building where Victoria and Joyce struggled to survive. "The least I can do is protect them," he thought. In the following days, he dedicated himself to finding ways to help her without Victoria refusing. Finally, he had an idea: to make an anonymous donation to the hospital where Joyce was being treated. He called Dr. Herrera, the cardiologist handling the case. "Doctor, I would like to cover the costs of Joyce Morales' operation, but I don't want them to know the money comes from me. Is there a way to make it seem like a medical aid program?" The doctor was silent for a few seconds. "It's unusual, but there is an anonymous donation fund. If you transfer the money, we can attribute it to a medical scholarship, and the family will believe it was systemic aid." "Perfect. How long would it take to schedule the surgery if I make the transfer today?" "We could operate next week." "Do it," Henry ordered without hesitation. The same day, he transferred the $600,000. He felt immediate relief, though he knew Victoria wouldn't easily forgive him. 2 days later, Victoria received an unexpected call. "Miss Morales, this is Dr. Herrera. We have excellent news. Joyce has been approved for a special medical aid program. Her surgery will be fully covered." Victoria was speechless. "But how? I didn't apply for anything. Sometimes hospitals send automatic requests. The important thing is that the operation will be performed on Tuesday." When she hung up, Victoria burst into tears, running to hug her sister. "We did it, Joyce! You're getting your operation!" "Seriously?" she whispered with tears in her eyes. "Yes, everything will be covered." They hugged, crying with joy. Victoria thought it had been a stroke of fate, but in reality, it was Henry's silent gesture. Meanwhile, he received confirmation from the hospital. Upon learning that the surgery was scheduled, he felt a satisfaction he hadn't known in a long time. For the first time in weeks, he slept peacefully. However, he knew the hardest part was yet to come: regaining Victoria's trust and confronting Paul and Patricia. On Saturday afternoon, he decided to go look for her. He remembered she had mentioned working extra jobs on weekends. He went through coffee shops, restaurants, and small cleaning offices, until by late afternoon, he found her. Victoria was cleaning the windows of an accounting office in downtown New York. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied in a ponytail. Even in those conditions, she exuded dignity. Henry waited on the sidewalk until she left the building, then approached cautiously. "Victoria." She stopped, surprised, and visibly annoyed. "Are you following me now?" "No," he stammered. "Well, yes, but not in that way. I wanted to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about. Listen, I know you don't believe me, but..." Henry lowered his voice. "I know about Joyce's operation. I know the hospital called." Victoria looked at him suspiciously. "So what? It has nothing to do with you. It was a medical aid program. The important thing is that now your sister will have an opportunity, and that makes me happier than I can explain." She watched him in silence, as if trying to decipher if there was anything hidden in his words. Finally, she sighed and started walking towards the subway. Henry followed her. "Just 5 minutes," he pleaded. "Let me talk." Victoria stopped abruptly and faced him. "5 minutes for what? To try to justify yourself?" "No, to tell you how I feel." She raised her eyebrows, incredulous. "I'm listening." Henry took a deep breath. It's not guilt, Victoria. It's admiration, respect, and something more that I'm still trying to understand. You forced me to look in the mirror and see that I wasn't as brave as I thought. You risked everything to help me, and I failed. Now I want to show you that I can be the man who deserved to defend you." Victoria looked at him coldly, though inside a slight tremor ran through her chest. "And who do you want to be now, Henry?" She held his gaze. "I want to be someone worthy of the courage you showed." The silence stretched for a few seconds. Finally, Victoria pointed to a diner on the corner. "All right, 5 minutes." They entered together, sat by the window, and ordered 2 hot chocolates. Henry opened his executive briefcase and took out a folder full of documents. "I want to show you something," he said, placing it on the table. "Everything I discovered about Paul and Patricia." Victoria cautiously took the papers and began to read. She leafed through the documents in silence. Each page confirmed what she had suspected. Falsified contracts, transfers to unknown accounts, emails where Paul and Patricia spoke of taking over the company as if it were plunder. "This," she murmured, her eyes fixed on the papers. "It's worse than I imagined." "Yes," Henry nodded. "They were planning to leave me with nothing, and you were sacrificed to protect their plan." Victoria placed the documents on the table and looked at him seriously. "What do you intend to do with all this?" "Expose them. I'm calling a meeting with the board of directors and the main shareholders. There. I'll show all this evidence." "Is that all?" Victoria asked, frowning. "It's not just that," Henry retorted. "It's risking everything in public. With the press and the board, if I make a mistake or if something goes wrong, I could end up just as they want. Ruined." Victoria watched him intently. There was sincerity in his voice, though also fear. "And you expect to do this alone?" Henry leaned forward. "I need your help, Victoria. You still have the recordings, the photos, the evidence you secretly obtained. If we combine them with what I found, there will be no way for them to deny it." She remained silent, moved by his words. Part of her wanted to say no, that she had already risked too much. But another, stronger part knew that if she remained silent this time, Paul and Patricia would win. "If we do this," she finally said, "it has to be today. They suspect. The more time passes, the more likely they are to destroy the evidence or set another trap." Henry nodded. "Today it is, then. I'll call the board for 2 o'clock this afternoon." "And if they try to get ahead of us?" Victoria asked. "They'll have to face the truth," Henry replied firmly. They remained silent for a moment, each processing the risk they were about to take. The diner was almost empty, and outside, people walked by, unaware of the storm brewing for one of New York City's most important companies. "Victoria," Henry said, lowering his voice, "I'm not just asking for your help as a witness. I want you to come back with me to the company, but not as a cleaning lady. I want to offer you a position as Vice President of Operations." Victoria choked on her hot chocolate. "Vice President? Are you kidding?" "No. You have the experience, the training, and above all, the integrity I need by my side." "But Henry," she hesitated. "I'm the woman everyone saw escorted out of the auditorium, accused of being a thief." "Precisely because of that," Henry replied. "Because you know what it's like to lose everything for doing the right thing. No one better than you to help me rebuild what Paul and Patricia tried to destroy." Victoria looked at him for a long time without answering. She felt her defenses wavering, though she didn't want to admit it. "Let me think," she finally said. Henry smiled. "Think as long as you want, but today I'd like you to be with me in that room." She lowered her gaze, thoughtful. She knew that confronting Paul and Patricia would be dangerous, but she also knew that Henry spoke with a different conviction, very different from the man who had remained silent in the auditorium weeks ago. When they left the diner, they had already decided on the plan. They would gather all the evidence, organize it into a single file, and present it to the company's board and partners. At 10 a.m., Henry was in his office reviewing the final details when the door suddenly opened. Paul entered without knocking. "We need to talk," he said in a cutting tone. Henry forced himself to remain calm. "What is it about?" Paul closed the door and approached the table with a firm step. "Your little nocturnal investigations." Henry felt a lurch in his stomach. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Paul retorted with a cold smile. "Did you think I wouldn't notice that someone accessed my encrypted files? Come on, Henry, you know me." Henry's heart pounded, but he kept his face serene. "I'm the CEO. I have the right to access any company file." "Yes, of course, your company," Paul laughed sarcastically. "For now." He took out his cell phone and placed it on the table. On the screen were several photos. Henry, entering Victoria's building, meeting with her at the diner, even the hug they had shared on the street the previous night. "What does this mean?" Henry asked, his voice barely a whisper. "It means I can not only sink you with financial evidence, but also with your personal life. You've used privileged information to contact a former employee and even financed her sister's surgery." "How do you know about the surgery?" Henry asked, feeling his blood run cold. "Come on, Henry. Did you really think you could move $600,000 without me noticing?" Paul leaned towards him with a venomous smile. "I can make it look like bribery, abuse of power, whatever I want." Henry glared at him. "You're a monster. No, I'm a businessman. You, on the other hand, are naive." Paul put his phone away. "I'll be clear. Cancel that board meeting, destroy the evidence, and sign the contract today. Or else," Paul smiled maliciously, "then Victoria and her sister will find out how easy it is to have an accident in New York City." Henry clenched his fists, containing his rage. At that moment, the door opened again. Patricia entered in her impeccable style, smiling as if at a fashion show. "Hello, Henry," she greeted with feigned sweetness. "I just came to witness your surrender." She sat on the arm of Paul's armchair and stroked his hair as if they were partners and lovers at the same time. "You won't get away with this," Henry said firmly. "We already have," Patricia retorted, taking a folder from her purse. "Here's everything we need to sink you. Falsified emails, supposed transfers you made to Victoria. No one will believe you." Henry took the papers and leafed through them. They were perfectly crafted, as if he had used company money to benefit Victoria in exchange for favors. "This is a setup." "Yes," Paul laughed. "But tell me, who do you think the board will believe more? You, who is kissing a cleaning lady, or me, your lifelong partner?" Henry looked at them with fury and disgust. "I won't surrender." Paul checked his watch. "I'll give you until noon. If you don't sign the contract, all this will come out, and your dear Victoria and her sister will pay the consequences." With that, they both left with triumphant smiles. Henry slumped into his chair. He felt the world collapsing around him. He looked at the folder with the fake evidence, and then at the true documents he kept in his executive briefcase. Two versions of reality, one that saved him and one that destroyed him. The phone rang. It was Victoria. "Henry, I'm already at the building." "Everything ready for the meeting?" He closed his eyes. If he told her the truth, he would put her in danger. "There's been a change of plans," he replied in a harsh voice. "The meeting has been cancelled." There was silence on the other end of the line. "All right. You sound strange." "I'm fine. Just legal complications." "Henry, you sound different." "I'm sure. We'll talk later." He hung up and buried his face in his hands. For the first time in his life, Henry felt defeated. Meanwhile, Victoria stood in front of the building with her phone in her hand and a terrible premonition. Something wasn't right. Victoria remained for a moment in front of the building, her phone still in hand. Henry's faded tone made it clear that something was wrong. He wasn't the same determined man who had promised the previous night to confront Paul and Patricia. Something was holding him back. She took a deep breath. She couldn't stand by. She knew every corner of the building, every corridor, and every service access. She had worked there for 8 months. She knew how to get in without being seen. At 9 p.m., when most people had already left, she returned in a dark hoodie and a small backpack. She slipped through the basement entrance, using an access code they almost never changed. She went up the service stairs to the executive floor. She knew exactly where to go. Paul's office. If Henry had changed his mind, it was because he had been pressured, and Paul always kept evidence of everything. She pushed the door carefully. To her surprise, it was Ahar. Inside, the desk was cluttered with disorganized folders, as if he had left in a hurry. Victoria began to look through them. She found falsified contracts with Henry's signature, copied, manipulated bank documents, and even printed emails with phrases that incriminated him. She photographed everything with her cell phone. Suddenly, she saw a strange pen holder on the desk. She picked it up and discovered that it was, in fact, a digital recorder. With her heart pounding, she turned it on and reviewed the latest files. The most recent one was dated that same afternoon. She played it and heard Paul's voice clearly. "If you don't sign, Henry, Victoria, and her sister will suffer the consequences." Then, Patricia's voice sounded cold as ice. "He won't dare defy us. He's always been too sentimental." Victoria covered her mouth with her hand. It was the proof they needed. She saved the recording to her phone and carefully left the office. At 6 a.m., she knocked on Henry's apartment door. He opened it, his face tired, still in his robe. "Victoria, "What are you doing here so early? I need to talk to you. It's urgent." She entered without waiting for permission, took out her phone, found the file, and pressed play. Paul's voice filled the room. "If you don't sign, Henry, Victoria and her sister will suffer the consequences." Henry froze. When it finished, he collapsed onto the sofa. "My God," he murmured. "So they recorded everything." "They incriminated themselves," Victoria said, her eyes firm. "We have the missing proof." "Victoria?" Henry looked at her with a mixture of relief and remorse. "You don't understand what this means to me. I was willing to sacrifice my company as long as I kept you both safe, and it would have been useless," she retorted. "They don't stop. Now we have to expose them before they try something worse." Henry nodded, for the first time in a long time with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Then, we'll do it today. I'll call the board for 2 p.m. This time, they won't be able to escape." The boardroom was packed at that hour. All members of the board of directors were there, several important shareholders, and even representatives from Lombard International. Among them, Mr. Dominguez, who seemed intrigued by the tension in the room. Henry took the floor. "Thank you all for attending on such short notice. Today I must clarify the truth about the supposed merger with Lombard." Paul and Patricia, seated in the front row, exchanged secure smiles. They didn't expect what was about to happen. "First," Henry continued, "I want to introduce someone." The door opened, and Victoria entered, walking with a firm step towards the front. A murmur ran through the room. Many remembered she had been publicly fired for espionage. "Miss Victoria Morales," Henry said, "was unjustly accused. Today she will demonstrate the truth." Victoria stood before the microphone. "Good afternoon. I know you remember me as the cleaning lady accused of stealing information, but today I want to show you what I really found." She turned on the projector, and the first image appeared on the screen, the official merger contract. "This is the document you all saw," she explained. In it, Mr. Fernandez would retain 65% control. She moved to the next slide. "And this is the real contract that Paul Caldwell and Patricia Thompson tried to slip in for signature. In this one, Henry Fernandez would be left with only 15% control." A murmur of indignation ran through the room. Paul stood up, agitated. "That's false." Victoria ignored him and pressed play on the recording. Paul's voice resonated loudly. "If you don't sign, Henry, Victoria and her sister will suffer the consequences." The silence was sepulchral. Then, exclamations of surprise filled the room. "That was taken out of context," Paul shouted, but no one seemed to believe him. Victoria switched to the next piece of evidence, bank transfers of millions of dollars to Paul's personal account. Then, an email from Patricia where she said, "With Henry out of the way, we'll have absolute control." Patricia stood up, indignant. "This is illegal. Using private recordings is a crime." Mr. Dominguez, Lombard's representative, then spoke in a grave voice. "What's illegal is falsifying contracts, diverting funds, and planning a corporate coup. Lombard had no knowledge of this. You have tarnished our name." Paul tried to approach the podium, but Henry stopped him with a look. 15 years of friendship," Henry said, his voice heavy with pain. "And it was all a lie." At that moment, the back door opened, and Detective Rivas entered with 2 FBI agents, Paul Caldwell and Patricia Thompson. He announced with authority, "You are under arrest for corporate fraud, document falsification, and threats." The auditorium erupted in applause as the agents placed handcuffs on them. Paul struggled and shouted, "This isn't over, Henry. You'll pay." Patricia accompanied him with a bitter smile. "You were always too weak," she said to Henry as she was escorted out. "That's why you never deserved anything." Henry didn't respond. He simply watched them leave, knowing that a dark chapter of his life was finally ending. Victoria turned off the projector and stepped down from the stage. When their eyes met, Henry smiled with gratitude. She returned the smile, though timidly, aware that there were still many things to heal. Hours later, with calm returning to the company, Henry and Victoria remained alone in the empty boardroom. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today," he said, approaching. "Don't thank me," she replied. "You were the one who made the decision to show the truth, even knowing what you were risking." "Victoria!" Henry took a deep breath. "When all this is over, I want you to come back, not as a cleaning lady, but as what you truly are, a brilliant professional." She looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "I'll think about it," she replied softly. For the first time in a long time, Victoria felt that maybe, just maybe, she could trust him again. That night, Henry left the building with a mixture of fatigue and relief. New York City continued to hum as always, its streets filled with lights and passers-by, but for him, everything had changed. He had regained control of his company, unmasked Paul and Patricia, and, most importantly, cleared Victoria's name. However, deep down, he kept asking himself one thing. Would she trust him again? 3 weeks later, Victoria was at the hospital, accompanying her sister. Joyce was recovering from the successful operation. The young woman, paler than usual but with a sincere smile, squeezed her hand. "Do you know the first thing I told the doctor when I woke up?" Joyce asked in a weak voice. "What?" Victoria replied, stroking her hair. "That I wanted to see the streets of San Francisco with you again when I'm recovered. Remember? We always dreamed of walking together across the Golden Gate Bridge." Victoria smiled through tears. "We will, I promise." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Henry appeared, dressed in a simple suit, without the rigidity of previous days. He carried a bouquet of flowers. "Sorry if I'm interrupting," he said in a soft voice. "I just wanted to know how she's doing." Joyce smiled. "It's the famous Henry you told me about." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Joyce, please, don't deny it, sis." Joyce laughed weakly. "It's obvious he cares about you." Henry approached the bed. "I'm glad to see you well. You're strong, just like your sister." Joyce squeezed his hand. "Promise me you'll take care of Victoria. She always takes care of everyone, but someone has to take care of her." Henry looked at her seriously. "I promise." Victoria watched him in silence. That promise didn't sound empty or forced. That same afternoon, Henry invited Victoria to walk through Washington Square Park. The sun shone, and the arch was illuminated with golden hues. The park was full of tourists, but among so many people, they seemed to be in a small world apart. "Why did you bring me here?" Victoria asked, curious. "Because this place represents something to me." Henry stopped and looked at the arch. "When I was young and only dreamed of owning a company, I would come here, sit on the steps, and think about everything I wanted to build. And now?" He looked at her. "Now I realize that the most valuable thing I can build isn't a company, but relationships that are true." Victoria lowered her gaze, moved. "Henry, I don't know if I can trust again. What happened in the auditorium hurt me too much." He nodded. "I understand. I won't ask you to forget overnight. I just want to show you through actions that I am a different man from the one who left you alone that time." They remained silent for a moment, looking at the lively park. "What if you fail again?" she asked in a low voice. "Then I will have lost the most important opportunity of my life," he replied without hesitation. "Because it's no longer just about the company, Victoria. It's about you." She looked at him, surprised. For the first time in a long time, she felt that a man's words were not empty promises but a real commitment. During the following week, Victoria began working with Henry on reorganizing the company. She didn't do it officially at first, but little by little she took on a fundamental role. She reviewed contracts, detected errors others missed, and proposed practical strategies. Employees were surprised to see her in executive meetings, but most soon understood why Henry listened to her so attentively. She had knowledge few could match. One day, after a long meeting with shareholders, Henry stopped her in the hallway. "Victoria, I need to make a formal proposal again," she joked. "You already offered me to be vice president?" "Yes, and I stand by it. But I don't want you to think I'm offering it out of gratitude, but because you truly deserve it. This week's numbers prove it. Thanks to your adjustments, we've recovered 15% of our losses." Victoria looked at him, incredulous. "Really? Really?" He smiled. "That's why I want you to accept the position of vice president, with a full salary and benefits, and with the freedom to make important decisions." She remained silent for a few seconds. She remembered everything she had been through, from cleaning the corridors of that building to being humiliated in the auditorium. And now Henry was opening the door to a completely different future. "All right," she finally said. "I accept." Henry smiled broadly. "You won't regret it." The news spread quickly within the company. Victoria Morales, the unjustly accused woman, was returning, but this time as vice president of operations. Some were surprised, others whispered behind her back, but most received her with respect. On her first day in her new office, located next to Henry's, Victoria stood before the window that offered an impressive view of the city. She had never imagined having such a space. Henry entered without knocking and leaned against the doorframe. "What do you think of your new view?" Victoria smiled. "I still can't quite believe it." "Believe it," he replied. "You earned every inch of this office." Both laughed softly. For the first time in weeks, Victoria allowed herself to feel a little peace. That night, Henry invited her to dinner at a restaurant in the West Village. The place was lit with lanterns, and the reflection of the lights created an almost magical atmosphere. "You know," Henry said as they toasted with red wine, "I always thought success was about having more money and more power. But after everything that happened, I realized that true success is having someone you can trust." Victoria looked at him seriously. "Trust is easy to say, but hard to regain." "I know," Henry lowered his glass. "I'm not asking you to give me your complete trust right now. I'm just asking for the opportunity to earn it." The silence was filled with soft background music and the murmur of the night. Victoria took a deep breath. "All right, one opportunity, but nothing more." Henry smiled gratefully. "That's enough for me." When they left the restaurant, they walked together down the street. The cool night air enveloped them, and the city lights seemed like fallen stars. Henry stopped for a moment and looked into her eyes. "Victoria, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. Would you allow me to kiss you?" She looked at him, surprised. Her first reaction was to avert her gaze, but then she slowly nodded. Henry leaned in and kissed her softly. It wasn't an impulsive kiss, but one full of calm, promise, and respect. When they parted, both smiled with a certain shyness. "This complicates everything," Victoria said, trying to joke. "The best things in life are often complicated," Henry replied. They walked together to the end of the street, knowing that what was beginning to grow between them went beyond a professional alliance. The following weeks were different at the company. For the first time in a long time, the atmosphere was one of hope. Employees whispered about what had happened at the meeting, how Paul and Patricia had been led out in handcuffs, how Victoria, whom everyone thought was just a cleaning lady, had confronted them with irrefutable evidence. Some still doubted, but little by little they began to see her with respect. She was no longer the woman with the cleaning cart, but the new vice president of operations. One morning, Henry entered her office with a smile. "Victoria, I want to show you something." He placed a financial report on her desk. She reviewed it carefully, and as she read, her eyes widened. "Is this real?" she asked, surprised. "Completely," Henry replied. "Thanks to the changes you proposed, we've recovered 20% of our losses in just 2 weeks." Victoria smiled, unable to hide her pride. "So, it wasn't crazy." "No," Henry said. "It was the best decision I've made in a long time, listening to you." She looked at him for a moment in silence, and both understood that they weren't just talking about business. In the afternoons, after long meetings, they used to walk together on the building's terrace from where they could see all of New York City. One of those times, Victoria stopped, leaning on the railing. "I never thought I'd be here," she confessed. "When I cleaned these corridors, I dreamed of occupying an office, but it seemed impossible." "And now?" Henry asked. "Now I feel that every sacrifice was worth it." He looked at her with admiration. "Victoria, you not only occupy an office, you're making a difference." She lowered her gaze, blushing. One night, while reviewing documents in Henry's office, he put his pen down on the desk and watched her. "Victoria, do you realize what we've built together in such a short time?" She looked at him, not quite understanding. "I mean the company, of course," he clarified, though his voice carried a different nuance. "But also us." Victoria sighed. "Henry, what I feel is complicated. I like being by your side. I respect you and, well, you know what happened. I'm afraid to trust too much again and get hurt." He slowly stood up and approached. "I understand. I won't pressure you. I just want you to know that I'm here, and every day that passes, I'm going to prove that I'm not the man who left you alone in the auditorium." She looked at him intently. For a few seconds, she said nothing, but her eyes spoke more than 1,000 words. That weekend, Henry invited her to leave the city. They drove to a charming town in upstate New York, where the fresh breeze and mountains created a fairy tale setting. They walked through the town among gardens and cobblestone streets. Victoria took a deep breath. "It's been years since I felt so at peace," she admitted. "I'm glad," Henry said. "You deserve peace and much more." They sat on a wooden bench overlooking the mountains. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Victoria," Henry said in a serious voice, "I want you to know something. No matter how much time passes, or what people say, I'm here for you and for Joyce. No matter what happens." She looked at him with shining eyes. For the first time, she began to believe that they weren't just words. Meanwhile, the consequences of the scandal were still being felt. Paul and Patricia faced legal proceedings, but they had left damaging contracts and angry suppliers. In a crucial meeting with international partners, Victoria took the floor. "I understand you have doubts after what happened," she said firmly. But I assure you that this company has new, more transparent and solid foundations. When she finished, the partners applauded. Henry looked at her with pride. That was brilliant, he whispered in her ear as they left. Victoria smiled. I just did what I had to. That's what makes you special, he replied. One night, after an especially long day, Henry walked her to the exit. The lobby was empty, lit only by warm lamps. Care for a coffee? He asked. At this hour, a coffee would be deadly, she laughed. But I'll take a walk. They went out into the street and walked along the quiet avenues. New York City slept, save for a few open bars and the distant murmur of cars. At one point, Henry stopped and looked at her seriously. Victoria, I know you still don't completely forgive me, and perhaps you'll never forget what happened. But do you think someday you might see me not just as your boss, but as someone who truly wants to be in your life? She looked at him, surprised, not knowing what to answer immediately. I don't know, she confessed honestly, but I know it feels good to be near you, and that already means something. Henry smiled, and they both continued walking in silence, simply enjoying each other's company. A week later, Joyce was discharged from the hospital. Victoria took her to a new apartment, which the company had given her as part of her position. It was much more spacious and brighter than the old apartment. Victoria, Joyce exclaimed upon seeing the living room. This is amazing. Victoria hugged her. It's our new beginning. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It was Henry with a box in his hands. I hope I'm not disturbing. I brought something to celebrate. Inside the box was a cake with the inscription, Welcome home, Joyce. The young woman smiled, moved. Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. Henry, he corrected. And don't thank me. The credit goes to your sister. Victoria watched him in silence. Every gesture, every word was breaking down the walls she had built. That night, when Joyce was already asleep, Victoria walked Henry to the door. You didn't have to bring anything, she said. I wanted to, he replied. You and your sister deserve to feel at home. They stood for a few seconds in silence, closer to each other than ever. Henry lowered his voice. Victoria, I don't know if it's the right moment, but what I feel for you, I can no longer keep silent. She looked at him, her heart racing. Henry, he paused inches from her lips. I won't kiss you if you don't want me to. Victoria hesitated only an instant before closing her eyes and leaning in. It was a tender kiss, full of suppressed emotions. When they separated, she smiled shyly. This changes many things. It only makes them better, he replied, caressing her face. For the first time, Victoria stopped resisting and allowed herself to believe in him. The next day, at the office, the employees noticed something different. Henry and Victoria shared glances that spoke more than any speech. No one said anything, but everyone knew that a new chapter was beginning, not only for the company but for the two of them. 2 months had passed since that night, when Victoria and Henry finally stopped hiding their feelings. Life at the company had changed completely. With the fall of Paul and Patricia, the board fully trusted the new leadership, and little by little, the numbers began to prove them right. Victoria, now officially Vice President of Operations, had earned everyone's respect. Her strategic decisions improved the balance sheets and strengthened the company's reputation. But most importantly, she had brought a new breath of fresh air, transparency, humanity, and approachability. One Friday afternoon, while reviewing reports in her office, Henry entered with 2 cups of coffee. It's time for a break, he said, placing a cup on her desk. Victoria smiled. Aren't you, the CEO, supposed to set an example and work nonstop? The true example is knowing when to rest, he replied, settling into the chair opposite her. They looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, enjoying the ease they had built. They were no longer just boss and vice president. They were companions, partners, and something deeper that neither of them could continue to deny. That night, Henry took her to a restaurant in the upscale part of the city. From the terrace, they could see New York City illuminated, with the Empire State Building shining in the center like a jewel. Remember what you told me in upstate New York? He asked, as they dined. What? Victoria asked, intrigued, that I was afraid to trust too much again. She lowered her gaze. I still think about it. Henry extended his hand and placed it over hers. Victoria, trust is not asked for. It's earned every day, and I want to earn it for life. She looked at him with shining eyes. She didn't answer with words, but her smile was enough. A few weeks later, the company organized a special event to celebrate its new direction. Employees were gathered in an elegant ballroom. Henry went up on stage and in front of everyone said, Today, we celebrate not only the company's recovery, but also the courage of those who dared to tell the truth. He turned to Victoria, who was among the attendees. Thanks to her, we are here, and I want to officially announce that Victoria Morales is our Vice President of Operations. The ballroom erupted in applause. Victoria went up on stage and greeted Henry. He took the opportunity to whisper, "This is just the beginning." She smiled, moved. After the event, they remained alone on the empty stage. Henry approached nervously with a small box in his hands. "Victoria, there's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time." She looked at him, surprised. "What is it?" Henry opened the box and showed a simple, elegant ring with a discreet diamond that sparkled under the lights. "Victoria, when you came into my life, I thought you were just a voice warning me about a mistake, but you became my partner, my savior, my friend, and the woman I love." She brought her hands to her mouth, tears in her eyes. "Henry, I can't imagine a future without you. Will you marry me?" Victoria was silent for a few seconds that felt eternal. Then she nodded with a trembling smile. "Yes, I will." Henry hugged her tightly and kissed her under the lights of the empty stage. It was as if everything they had suffered had brought them to this moment. The wedding day was simple but beautiful. They chose the Central Park Conservatory garden, surrounded by flowers and with a small group of guests. Joyce, completely recovered from the operation, was the maid of honor and couldn't stop smiling. When Victoria walked down the aisle in a simple and elegant white dress, Henry felt he couldn't breathe. She looked at him with tenderness, and in her eyes, there was no trace of past doubts. "I promise to take care of you, respect you, and walk by your side in everything," Henry said in his vows. "And I promise never to stay silent when I see the truth, even if it's difficult," Victoria replied with a knowing smile. "I promise to be with you in every battle and in every victory." They exchanged rings amidst tears and applause. Life continued its course. Henry and Victoria, now married, shared not only the company's direction but a home full of love. Joyce lived with them for a while, recovering completely, and from time to time she would remember, laughing, "If it weren't for my sister daring to speak up that time, none of this would have happened." She was right. It had all started with a whisper at the exact moment. One afternoon, walking together across the Brooklyn Bridge, Henry held Victoria's hand and said, "Do you realize what we've built?" She looked at him with tenderness. "Yes, and this time it's not just a company, it's a life together." Henry leaned in and kissed her as the sun set over the East River, illuminating the bridge with a golden glow. The story of Victoria and Henry became an example for everyone in the company of courage, integrity, and how a small gesture can change everything. What began as a whispered warning turned into deep love and a shared life. And although challenges still remained, they would face them together, convinced that no betrayal or obstacle could defeat those who act with truth and heart.